Hi, I'm Vagrant Cascadian. This is good. Thank you for the check-in. I'm Vagrant Cascadian. This is oh
I'm Chris Lamb.
yep. We're folks who work on reproducible builds, and we will be presenting. Never mind the checkboxes. Here's reproducible builds, and of course, to procrastinate writing this talk, I made some cover art. Um, some of you might not recognize this, but yeah, it's a parody and it's directly related to what we're dealing with. Um, so, uh, this is like basically a parody of the cover of a punk album from the 70s that was, you know, they had some punk things. They were maybe a bit mainstream. Who knows? Whatever. But we will be using some punk themes. I'm not particularly punk minded, but I've wandered, edged towards punkness or not punkness over time. Um, but again, that's us. You can see the likeness, I imagine. The both of us work on a reproducible builds team, but it's really part of a larger community. Um, yeah, I don't know if you want to say a bit
Yes,
more about that.
we have at least 400, maybe close to 400 named contributors from various areas and maybe 40, 50 separate projects over the years. We were motivated off to start a project. Whilst the idea for reproducible builds has been around for a long time, we were motivated to start a proper project after some of the global surveillance disclosures, starting with the Snowden revelations in 2013, followed by some other ones as well. So we needed a systematic approach to what's now being called software supply chain security. This is
Yeah.
what Reproducible Builds project is about.
So, um, so I'm gonna use a bit of a framework on some kind of basic punk values and ideologies. Um, we'll take it with a grain of salt to some degree, but so basically, autonomy is a really valuable principle in the punk movement. Like, you don't want to be beholden to the man, as it were. Um, Also, independence. That's arguably another word for autonomy, but we'll stick it in there just for good measure. And strangely enough, there's autonomy, but there's also a very strong sense of mutual aid, and that's like a really big thing in the free software movement as well. So you share with each other, you share with all of these autonomous individuals, and you grow together. Uh, that builds a community, right? You're all doing things together. And there's a real do-it-yourself ethic. So like, people will like actually learn how to sew as punks, or even knitting in some circles. That's like, not the thing your average consumer really takes up. So there's a real sense of like taking it into your own hands and doing something yourself. So those are some of the ideas and frameworks I want to evaluate some kind of regulatory and compliance schemes out there. Uh, and yeah, total blatant disregard for authority is definitely a punk value. I might soften it a bit for the purposes of this talk and say a healthy skepticism of authority. But yeah, we're talking about punks. They definitely have a blatant disregard for authority. So, um, Physical supply chains, you often end up with like raw materials. You turn them into like some slightly less raw material, which is used to make something. The example in this is kind of showing how you turn crude oil into some plastic components, which end up in a keyboard, which end up in a laptop. And then it goes through like various series of warehouses, shipping around the world, and ends up in a consumer's hands. And believe me, when they're talking about making laptops, they're usually talking about consumers. So this is kind of an example of a physical supply chain. A lot of these ideas they've been trying to apply it to software supply chains, and I could see why. But basically, these are like the components that make up the software. You depend on these other things, you bring them in. But it kind of falls down a bit, and I don't know if any of you were here Thursday, but Bradley Kuhn gave a great talk kind of leading in and literally recommending coming to this talk. So, and maybe talks about it in a little more length in ways that I think are worth reviewing the video footage if you go back to it. But really, physical objects and software, they're pretty different. In particular, software is it's practically an idea just kind of stored as electrons or, magnetic stripes or whatever, flashing lights somewhere. But it's not like a physical object that you really need to port from here to there. Especially in today's modern era with, a functioning internet. So stuff moves around really quickly. It's easy to copy. It's easy to duplicate. You can make infinite copies of it almost instantaneously. Physical objects, some of them like expire. You don't want they're hard to reproduce. You actually have to grow food. You can't just, oh, my friend's got a copy of a bagel and just give me another bagel, whatever. So there are fundamental differences in these kinds of things. And and they're just hugely different issues like you have to warehouse physical goods and ship them. And it's just fundamentally different. Maybe if the internet completely broke down and we had to ship stuff on like physical CDs or something, or, USB sticks, then you start to have some of the similarities, but even then the copying is just totally different. So arguably the supply chain analogy doesn't quite fit in the same way, but we can't really go back. It's happening regardless of whether we want that analogy to be the message or not. But let's challenge it everywhere we can. That healthy disrespect for authority. So a concept used in physical supply chain security is a bill of materials. So it's just a list of all the raw materials, all the parts that are a little less raw, a chain of various different things that go into these manufactured products. And that can be used also to trace was this manufactured in a questionable regime or something like that. So there may be political reasons for keeping track of where your stuff comes from. And to a large extent, this is being tried to apply to software. So software bill of materials, you do have dependencies. You do have stuff that goes into it. You do have stuff necessary to use in order to build it. And I'm going to say for the kind of work we do, you do need some sort of track of what went into this software. So these are useful tools, although the framing of supply chain security is a little bit questionable. Back in the late 80s, there were a bunch of standards called the ISO 9000 family of standards. I don't know a whole lot about it, but it was basically an attempt to create an international set of standards for making sure that consumers got a certain quality of product. And it applied to everything. If you go to the Wikipedia page on this stuff, there's a picture of a fish vendor and it says certified ISO 9001. So, I mean, it's a very broad set of standards. And there is some degree of third-party certification as part of the ISO standards. So that's interesting. Going back to kind of some of the punk values here, this is definitely somebody outside telling us what to do. The disrespect for authority might come in there. There may be some useful things in some of these regulations. It is a vast suite of regulations. I tried to kind of wrap my head around some of this stuff and just imagine just like a day or two of spending hours a day just wasn't enough. These regulations, they get to be pretty large. Let's see here. One thing that's a little more recent, the Cyber Resilience Act in Europe is really, I think it was ostensibly passed in 2024, and if I understand correctly, it doesn't really go into effect till 2027. And it's not a, I don't quite understand exactly what it is, and that's part of the problem. Mostly applies to Europe, but can have impacts on the rest of the world. And one of the notable things I saw in it was like it's a bunch of voluntary self assessments. I know at least like one European company, Volkswagen, when required to do various assessments, they just figured out ways to work around it. They like figured out, hey, we're running in a test environment, and let's change the output when we notice we're running in a test environment. So I don't have a lot of confidence that a voluntary self-assessment would work when like they already work around the required assessments. And and maybe that's not an example of every company, but I've got my doubts. It also introduces this concept of open source stewards, and it's a little hard to wrap your head around it. I like tried to follow a bunch of blog posts in which they're like kind of hashing out like, am I an open source steward? They can't figure it out. And if you can't figure out like whether I am part of this like regulatory system, that might be a problem. We need a system we can understand. And it makes a lot of sense. And the overarching like goals of the Cyber Resilience Act are actually good. It definitely like increases awareness of the various parts of the software systems that people are really relying on. And it also really pushes for vendors to kind of be held liable for what they're shipping out. And I think that's great. But it's kind of weird when free and open source software, a large base of it is just developed by people who are just passionate and interested about it as a hobby. And even small businesses are like kind of should be held to a different scale than a large, international mega corporation. So there are some questions about the Cyber Resilience Act. This definitely fails some of the punk tests. There's not a lot about autonomy in here. There's not a lot about independence. You have to follow these rules. You don't even know whether the rules apply to you. And it's straight down from like a large body of government, for whatever that's worth. Similarly, in the U.S., in response to a number of major security threats, I don't know if you recall SolarWinds. I'm pretty sure that is part of what prompted this back in 2021. Mostly relevant for the United States of America. Again, what? Okay. And it's not yet revoked. It's still kind of sort of theoretically in effect, but the administration that issued it and the administration that's currently in power, they don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, and sometimes even if they do see eye to eye, they revoke stuff anyway. So whether this actually matters in the long term is kind of debatable at this point. They talk a lot about software bill of materials, otherwise known as SBOMs, which Bradley talked about at length on Thursday, and I was very happy to see that talk. And they had this weird concept with like auto-generated SBOMs. They were talking about these auto-generated SBOMs for stuff where you try to retroactively create an SBOM that's like kind of like, well, we pretend that this is what we use to build the software. I kind of question the ability to independently verify that. But here we are. Let's see. There's another project called OpenChain. They are like the epitome of checkboxes. When I talk about never mind the checkboxes, and they some of these checkboxes are totally okay things, but a lot of it is voluntary self-assessment again, and I kind of have a little distrust of how reliable that voluntary assessment is going to be. A lot of the checkboxes are like, we have security policies. Oh, jeez. Does this work? Oh, dear. Well, that's not great. Let's start over. Okay. All right. We'll get through this. So, voluntary self-assessment. They actually require that you have a security policy, which isn't in and of itself a bad thing. And that you have people who work on security, who know that the policies exist, who document and review the policies, and we document and review the implementation of the policies, and that's good. It's better than not having all that stuff. And then they have a section on actual security stuff, which is good. Well, and I'll kind of deep dive into that. Well, not very deep because it's just a checklist, but and they keep track of all the software that they have, and they archive the software, which that one's actually pretty important in my opinion. So that's cool. But again, this is all like a voluntary set of checklists. And then, because we don't have enough documentation yet, we document that we documented the documentation of the documents. That's this hyper summary of their long list of checkboxes with a little tongue-in-cheek applied to it. And then we review that we documented the documentation of the documentation of the review of the documentation. Kind of I kind of go a little crazy at some point. So yeah, it's pretty recursive, like reviewing and documenting, which is actually a good thing. You know, you want to check and make sure when you're dealing with security issues that you really got it. I mean, I get that. And maybe it's just not relevant at the scale of projects I work at. You know, when you're working at a large organization which has like thousands of people in each branch and the one hand doesn't know what the other is doing, maybe that's relevant. I don't know. So the actual security stuff, we identify the threats. Well, that's good. Yeah, you kind of need to do that for security. We detect vulnerabilities. Okay, good that you're doing that. And we follow up when we find vulnerabilities. Okay, yeah, this is some pretty basic stuff for like reviewing your security policies. We talk about the vulnerabilities that we found. Okay, yeah. And we actually test the software that we release that we claim fixes the vulnerabilities. These are some pretty low bars. And I'm glad that they're trying to actually push for these low bars, but I think we can do a little better. Do you want to step in for a moment?
Yes. So we've just outlined a number of regulatory series of checkboxes. We put it like that. So a lot of these regulatory processes and standards bodies, they do. As a framework, they do provide some sort of basis for security. As Vega mentioned, it's better than nothing. But they do fall short of solving real-world problems. So they do focus primarily on documentation. And this is perhaps a legacy from physical bill of materials that we alluded to earlier, being applied to software. And software being an inherently different kind of product, if I can use that word, means that there are different solutions available to it, which we'll come on to later. The static nature of standards means they are less dynamic. Security moves very fast. There's new compared to physical supply chain issues. Knocking over a truck is pretty old, but new types of vulnerabilities are quite new and things like that. So, and then sort of new ones being discovered, and the whole system of software moves a lot quicker than physical objects and things like that. These, as Vagrant humorously outlined, these processes can be very resource intensive to the point where most people just don't bother. I mean, do you really ISO certification probably costs a lot, just even if it was like a free process to go through. You've probably have taken a lot of people. You've probably hired specialists to do it, specialists to check it and things like that. So a lot of the time it just sort of doesn't really get done. That kind of thing. So what if there was like a better way of doing this kind of thing? So yes, the other issue is that they don't really provide security guarantees. You've like in a sense just documented what you've done and things like that. And again, like with software, we feel there's something different that you can do because of that as well. So yeah, do you want to take up this one?
Yeah. So does it improve the quality of software to have a huge long checklist of things to go through? Yeah, probably. I mean, a little bit. I don't know how much. I mean, can you quantify it? Can you run some tests on it? And at that point, you're actually doing more real work. So I don't know. I don't know how much these things really affect quality. I think again, I'll reiterate, it's way better than absolutely nothing, but that's a pretty low bar. So, do SBOMs give you the information necessary to verify how a given artifact was built? That's a bit questionable at this point. They provide all sorts of information about the dependencies you claim you used. They provide, but there's no way to tell that's what you actually used, inherent in, at least my understanding, most SBOM implementations. Although, honestly, I tried to find an SBOM implementation, and it's hard to find the documentation for the two major standards. You go to the SPDX dev site, and you go to the SPDX dev site and you click on the find out more information about SBOMs, and it sends you to a page about licensing issues. And I'm like, but I want to know about SBOMs. That's the link I clicked on. And then there's some other standard out there. So they list the software dependencies, and that's important. You need to actually list the software you use. Ideally, it's the software you actually used and just not a promissory list. Oh, I swear, I used this software to build, I used all these tool chains and all this software to build the software. But in some of the implementations, you can obfuscate the dependencies because they're worried about proprietary software and proprietary interests. So you can just have like some hash of the dependency instead of like the actual dependency itself. I'm all for hashes, but we still need the transparency to know what that hash is a hash of. So there are some weird things there because they're trying to cater to proprietary interests. And proprietary interests, in my opinion, are kind of fundamentally against security at the end of the day. They might not even be published. You might not actually be able to get the SBOM unless like by request. And that has some serious limitations on the ability to independently verify it. You know, back to those punk values of independence. Like you gave me this software and I don't want to have to go back to you and have you tell me some more lies about what was in the software. I want to be able to check it independently through some, any other party can do this. So, what is the goal of all these checklists? Well, that's a good question. But I think more importantly, what should the goals be? And I think you should be able to independently verify the results of any, promise of if somebody gives you a software object, they should be able to verify the results. I mean, that's just, and the important part is it's independent third parties, A random person in the audience should be able to if they've got the technical chops, go through, install the list of dependencies, build the software, and see if it actually is what it said it was. And then they're like, signatures are cool, but that's like just another set of blind trusts. There have been a number of supply chain attacks where they compromise the signing service. And so the signature only gives you so much trust. And again, like many things in security, it's better than nothing and actually pretty good in many cases. But you have to be really paranoid about those signing services that are signing the objects. And signatures really should expire at some point. But then what do you do if you need to verify that the signature was valid at the time that the signature was made? And if it was compromised, maybe it could be retroactively recreated. So I don't want to rely too much on just trusting signatures. That's almost just getting back into blindly trusting the, vendor says everything's cool. It's probably cool. That's not a very good security model. So So we have this reproducible builds project, and maybe use them.
Yes, so by contrast, the Reproducible Builds project takes a different approach to all of these concerns. To start with the definition of what a reproducible build is. A build is reproducible if anyone with the same source code and the same dependencies can build a bit-for-bit identical version of the same software. That's one there, yeah. So the reason why we care about that's sort of a technical definition up front. But the reason we care about this is if multiple people can independently build the same piece of software, that's quite strong evidence that neither of those people's build servers or computers have been tampered with. Like for example, it's an example, yeah. This in turn allows third parties to then trust the output of what we've done without building it themselves. So just for an example, if I can build exactly the same piece of software that the Debian build servers are producing, it means that neither of us have been tampered with, and we can trust the output from the Debian build servers. So for example, Vagrant can then just install the software from that service without having to build it themselves. So this is like a bottom-up independent approach to security in that sense. What is needed for you? Sorry, yeah, you want to take this?
Sure. Okay. So again, the reproducible builds definition is, yeah. Oh, it's when maybe I'm stepping on something. I don't know. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, the reproducible builds definition, builds reproducible given the same source code, the build environment, build instructions, anybody can recreate it. So obviously you need the source code. You need the software used during the build. In theory, you could use an SBOM for this, but, and you need instructions on how to actually run the build. Okay, I've got some software, I've got this, but like, how do I actually start the build? That's kind of important. And it's really important that any party can do this sort of thing. Yeah, so we basically need SBOMs or SBOM-like data, ideally in a non-obfuscated form, and ideally publicly published so that anybody can download it. And really, when it comes down to it, have you heard some of these requirements for source code before? It sounds an awful lot like free and open source software, if I recall correctly. And in order to build free and open source software, you usually need to be able to use the build tools that generate that software and turn it into something useful. And you need the instructions of how to actually perform the build. This is like free software and reproducible builds. I kind of feel in my heart, reproducible builds is like the spiritual successor, like the fifth freedom that you need it's like the fifth free software freedom. Like, is it really free software if you can't prove it? I mean, so, right, you can use it, you can share it, you can study the source, you can change the source, you can give it to other people. So, I'm going to make the case that reproducible builds with free and open source software, you could theoretically do reproducible builds with proprietary software, but you'd probably have to get into messy things like NDAs and stuff, and that really kills the autonomy and independence. It's harder to do mutual aid if you need to start signing NDAs and stuff in order to get access to the software. You could hire like some proprietary third-party vendor to do the verification for you, but then you're paying the vendor to do the verification, and I don't know if you know, but like sometimes people, when they get paid to do something, you want the right results to come out, and if they get paid to do something and the wrong results come out, sometimes they get fired. So it doesn't really have the strength and transparency that just I can download it. A random person off the internet can download the software, download all the dependencies, and build it and verify it themselves. That's a DIY ethic that free software is so amazing for. And it builds a community. So I would really love to bring more people in the free and open source software community into reproducible builds. I would love more companies using free software to actually get the whole community thing, and bring us all together. So yeah. And a healthy skepticism of authority can be really helpful when you're trying to do transparency, when the private interests kind of create misaligned incentives. We really need like the level of transparency and autonomy and independence and ability to verify it yourself, or verify it for your friend. Maybe your friend doesn't have the skills to do it, but you can do it, and then they trust you because you have this like serious personal relationship. So yeah, that's the gist of it. Any questions? How do we do mics here? Okay.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask about, when we're talking about reproducible builds, it's pretty easy to think about, I got a big pile of C files and I run GCC and then I hash the output and all good. But what if we're talking about Python projects, Ruby projects, JavaScript projects? Do you guys have some thoughts about those kinds of things and what we need for similar benefits in those areas?
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Repeat the question, yes. So the question was, in a traditional compilation, sort of C, there is an argument that reproducibility is quite important. But given that Python files and other interpreted languages are not compiled in the same way, they are interpreted languages, do we still need reproducible builds? What's the advantage of reproducible builds in that area? Is that kind of question? So yes, so whilst Python and other interpreted languages aren't compiled in the same way that C is, the release processes for all of these projects still have a sort of compilation aspect to them. They're often being bundled into the same place. There are often differences in Python's outputted documentation, for example, and it's still possible to include vulnerabilities within Python release processes. It's particularly the setup.py, for example, mechanism, whilst deprecated, allows for malicious code to be inserted and things like that. Sorry, there's something I'm missing on this one. But yeah, so and the ability to independently verify tarballs and other kind of archive formats is still exactly the same across traditional compilation and scripting interpreted languages and things like that.
Sure. Go for it.
Yeah, you talk a lot about the importance of reproducible builds in industry. I think that that reproducibility is very important in academia as well. And there have been errors where people have caught errors in, for example, data analysis by trying to reproduce it on their own and noticing differences or where errors came from. Has your project worked with people in academic circles,
right?
And are you looking to branch out into that?
Okay, I'll repeat the question. Basically, the question is getting at reproducibility also sounds really important for academic circles. And have we branched into that area? There are a number of people I know specifically through the GNU Geeks community, which do a lot of high performance computing, like genetics analysis and all sorts of stuff like that. And they're also really keen on reproducible builds. And there's a fundamental scientific principle of reproducibility, right? And I feel like as maybe computer scientists, maybe we've kind of fallen down on that. But yes, definitely interested in more ways we can collaborate. And I also remember the first time I heard about a reproducible paper where they didn't actually talk to us first, or reproducible builds related software research, and they didn't talk to us. It was like, oh, I think we made it. Yeah. So yeah, Bradley.
Yeah, I have sort of a punk rock question.
Yeah.
So as you know, I'm a fan of your choice of title. I prefer West Coast U.S. punk to British punk. So I want to propose. I know the whole point of punk rock is to be in your face and offensive to everyone. So I won't say the full title of the song, but I would like to ask for the theme song of Reproducible Bills to be "Chicken Expletive Conformist" by the Dead Kennedys. And if you're not comfortable with that, can we work on recruiting a punk band to write a theme song for Reproducible Bills?
Okay, so the I will summarize and paraphrase the question. Blah blah blah. Various different niche punk movements. And can we get a band to actually record a song for Reproducible Builds? Is that a reasonable a punk band? Yeah. Well, of course. Sure. If you have any leads, you know how to get a hold of me.
And we have the artwork already.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Pono.
So you touched a little bit on some of the downsides of SBOMs, but are there any, for license compliance specifically, are there any differences in the processes that Reproducible Builds has versus kind of the SBOM stuff?
Okay. So the question is there any difference in terms of license compliance versus in relation to the SBOM side? I think the number one thing that Reproducible Builds can offer for license compliance is we can prove, well, we can reproducibly produce this software given this set of sources. We're very confident that we can look through all of those sources and know what the relevant licenses are. So in that sense, I mean, is that getting to your question? Yeah, I mean, how can you prove what the license is if you can't even prove what source code you actually used? And Reproducible Builds is, as far as I know, the simplest way to really identify, yes, this binary was really produced from this source code.
I don't think there's any way of guaranteeing that everything in your code, everything that you do a reproducible build will be free software. You just know that the source will be available, and that will let you at least analyze it and say, oh, is it actually free software, like things like that. But I mean, just having a guarantee that all the source is literally available to you is at least obviously the first step, and it is very likely that it is therefore free software within a more broader open source environment of building software.
Yeah. How about you first?
Do you have any thoughts on extending reproducible builds to, say, training machine learning models, verifying that the final binary or the weight of the model is using certain data set and using certain
So the question is whether reproducible builds or the methods can be applied to machine learning, and whether models can be tested and seeing whether the output can be shown to be reproducible across time and things like that. Is that a good summary of the?
Yes, to verify that. Well, let's say in the context of language models, verify that the final weight that the company or organization releases is actually using certain data set and pipeline that it can get.
Getcha. Yes. Can reproducible builds be used to verify that the inputs and the weights at the end of a large language model were actually based on the original inputs that they promise to them? So is this something that you have insight?
My understanding of a lot of these things, I think there is some degree of determinism in a lot of the model building, but part of what makes them work is a little bit of fuzziness, and that's I'm by no means an expert on these sorts of things, but my understanding is that reproducible builds will be of limited use in some of those contexts. Obviously, if you get a bit-for-bit identical result, you can have reasonable confidence, but I think there's something fundamentally different going on there. But by all means, anybody else who knows more, chime in. Yeah. Kathy?
Do you have a short way of describing what your project does to help reproducibility happen in the software world? I mean, just services or tools, or what do you guys do?
So the question is, do we have a short explanation of the goals of the projects, goal of the Reproducible Builds project and what we do, including its methods. Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sort of blanking. You go ahead.
Oh, sure. So basically, what we provide a bunch of documentation about, like, oh, you're having a timestamp problem. Here's an example written in Python. Here's an example written in Rust. So we have documentation that just kind of documents some of the common issues and at least one or two ways to solve them. We also have tooling that when you do a build and then you do another build and you're getting a different result, we have tooling called Diffoscope that can be used to analyze the differences and kind of hone in on, like, oh, okay, what kind of an issue is this? So we have tooling like that. We have a community. We have a mailing list with people from all sorts of different distributions and software backgrounds. We've mostly focused on, like, distributions such as Debian and Arch Linux, but there are some folks in the, like, Java community who have been doing great work on reproducible builds, and would love to get our feet dipped in the water in the Python community. A lot of our tooling is actually written in Python, so that seems like a natural next steps one of these days. But yeah. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Oh, how many people in here went to Bradley's talk on Thursday? All right. Cool.
Wait,
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I kind of, after seeing that talk, I kind of just wanted to, like, take Bradley's talk and inject it in the middle of my talk, but it was great.
It's CC by saying, and if you want
Yeah.
I'll get a GPL.
Oh yeah, my copyright actually. Oh yeah. Well, I guess thank you all. You can help make it happen. We're always looking for a little bit of funding. This stuff doesn't run itself. And so there are and we could love collaborators and people contributing to the software and bringing in new types of software into the reproducible builds community. Yeah, always looking for sponsors of both labor, energy, and enthusiasm. Okay.